The mystery of Cleopatra's legacy. Who was Cleopatra, and why does her name continue to echo across the centuries with such power? To ask this question is to open a doorway into one of history's most captivating mysteries, a tale that blends the splendor of ancient Egypt with the immense political struggles of Rome and the enduring fascination with a woman who defied expectations and shaped destiny. Cleopatra VII, Philopator, last sovereign of the Ptolemaic dynasty, stands at the crossroads of antiquity where myth and reality entwine. She is remembered as the final pharaoh, the ruler whose life embodied both the magnificence and the fragility of her kingdom. She lived during an age when Egypt was no longer the grand empire of the pyramids, yet it still held immense wealth, strategic power, and a culture that inspired awe even among the Romans who sought to dominate it. From the banks of the Nile to the palaces of Alexandria, Cleopatra ruled in a time when kingdoms fell before the might of Roman expansion. But unlike many rulers, she did not fade into the background of history. She emerged as a figure who knew how to command loyalty, weave alliances, and employ her intellect to preserve her throne. It is this interplay of politics, culture, and personal ambition that transformed her into one of history's most enigmatic figures. The image of Cleopatra has shifted endlessly across centuries. To the Romans who wrote about her, she was both dangerous and alluring, a foreign queen who threatened the stability of their empire. To later ages, she became the embodiment of beauty and seduction, a woman who conquered men as powerful as Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Yet behind these portrayals lies the question of truth. Was she merely a manipulative enchantress, or was she a sovereign of vision, intelligence, and determination who sought to secure Egypt's independence in a world consumed by Roman conquest? This storybook invites you to journey through the fragments of her world, piecing together what remains of her reign, her alliances, and her legacy. It is not simply the biography of one woman, but the unraveling of an era where cultures collided, where kingdoms crumbled, and where the fate of a queen became inseparable from the fate of a nation. Cleopatra's life is a reminder that history does not only remember empires, but also individuals whose choices reverberated far beyond their time. As we begin this exploration, we must look beyond legend and myth and into the hidden corridors of time where her true story waits to be uncovered. The Nile Kingdom and Ptolemaic Egypt. To understand Cleopatra, one must first step into the world she inherited, a realm where the Nile shaped both life and power, and where a foreign dynasty ruled in the name of Egyptian tradition. The Nile River, eternal and unyielding, was the lifeblood of Egypt. Its annual floods nourished the soil, ensuring the fertility of fields that fed an entire people. Along its banks, temples rose as monuments to gods and rulers alike, while cities thrived as centers of trade and culture. By the time of Cleopatra's birth in 69 BCE, Egypt had already lived through millennia of greatness. The pyramids had stood for over 2,000 years, silent witnesses to an ancient civilization that had dazzled the world with architecture, mathematics, art, and spiritual thought. Yet Cleopatra's Egypt was not the Egypt of the Old or Middle Kingdoms. It was a land transformed by centuries of foreign influence and internal change. Her family, the Ptolemies, were not Egyptians by origin. They were Macedonian Greeks, descendants of Ptolemy I Soter, a general of Alexander the Great who seized control of Egypt after Alexander's death in 323 BCE. From that moment, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt, blending Greek and Egyptian customs into a hybrid kingdom. The Ptolemies built their capital at Alexandria, a city envisioned by Alexander himself, and transformed it into one of the greatest centers of knowledge and trade in the ancient world. Its lighthouse, one of the seven wonders, guided ships into a harbor filled with goods from every corner of the Mediterranean. Its library, legendary though much of its history remains clouded, became the symbol of human inquiry and preservation of wisdom. Cleopatra's ancestors adopted the outward forms of Egyptian kingship. They took on the title of pharaoh, participated in sacred rituals, and were depicted in temple reliefs as chosen rulers of the gods. Yet within their palaces, they remained Greek in language, education, and culture. The Ptolemies spoke Greek, worshipped Greek deities alongside Egyptian gods, and often engaged in dynastic marriages that revealed more concern for bloodlines than for harmony with their subjects. This dual identity created a kingdom that was both Egyptian and foreign, both traditional and Hellenistic. It was within this complex fusion that Cleopatra emerged. The Egypt of her youth was a land of contradictions. On the one hand, it possessed immense wealth. Its fertile land and access to trade routes brought in grain, papyrus, glass, and luxury goods. On the other hand, it was deeply dependent on the will of Rome. By the 1st century BCE, Egypt had become a vital supplier of grain to the Roman Republic, which meant its rulers were under constant pressure to maintain Rome's favor. The Ptolemies could not simply act as independent monarchs. Their survival depended on balancing Egyptian traditions, Greek heritage, and Roman demands. Cleopatra was unlike many of her predecessors in one crucial respect. While most of the Ptolemies clung fiercely to their Greek heritage, she actively embraced the Egyptian side of her rule. Sources suggest that she was the first of her dynasty to master the Egyptian language. She was also highly educated, trained in philosophy, rhetoric, science, and politics. This intellectual foundation set her apart from her ancestors, many of whom were consumed by court intrigues and civil wars that weakened the dynasty. Her early life unfolded within the luxurious yet unstable walls of Alexandria's royal court. The Ptolemaic dynasty was notorious for its internal strife. Siblings turned against one another, marriages dissolved into plots, and assassinations were not uncommon. In such an environment, the survival of a royal child depended on wit, alliances, and caution. Cleopatra grew up in a palace that echoed with both learning and danger. She would have witnessed ceremonies in honor of the gods, heard debates among scholars, and also seen betrayal unfold among her own kin. The political landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean added to the uncertainty. Rome was rising as the supreme power, extending its authority over Greece, Asia Minor, and the Near East. Client kings and foreign rulers increasingly lived at the mercy of Roman generals and senators. Egypt was one of the last independent kingdoms, but its independence was fragile, secured only by its resources and the skill of its monarchs. When Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, ruled Egypt, he relied heavily on Roman support to maintain his throne, even paying vast sums of money to secure recognition. His reign was marked by unrest at home and dependence abroad. These circumstances shaped Cleopatra's understanding of power. It was not only about commanding armies or holding a crown, but also about navigating alliances with stronger forces. Cleopatra's connection to the Nile was more than symbolic. The river defined Egypt's prosperity, and every ruler was judged by their ability to ensure its stability. Famine, drought, or failure in administration could ignite rebellion. The people looked to the pharaoh as both a political leader and a divine guardian who upheld Ma'at, the balance of the universe. For Cleopatra to succeed, she would have to embody not only the image of the Greek queen, but also the sacred role of pharaoh, bridging the cultural divide that had defined her dynasty for centuries. The Alexandria she knew was a marvel of the ancient world. Its great harbor welcomed traders, philosophers, and envoys. Its palaces gleamed with marble and gold, while its streets hummed with languages from across the Mediterranean. At the same time, beyond the grandeur, the vast majority of Egyptians lived lives shaped by toil in the fields, labor in workshops, and devotion to their local gods. Cleopatra inherited not just a throne, but a divided society where wealth and knowledge flourished for the few, while many struggled under the burdens of taxation and political unrest. This was the stage upon which Cleopatra would rise, an Egypt ancient yet transformed, independent yet fragile, rich yet vulnerable. Her identity as both a Ptolemaic queen and an Egyptian pharaoh made her unique, a ruler capable of understanding the dual soul of her kingdom. The Nile, the city of Alexandria, the gods and traditions of Egypt, and the looming shadow of Rome all shaped her destiny. In order to survive and thrive, she would have to wield her intelligence as skillfully as a general wields a sword, and her voice as powerfully as the Nile's flood nourishes the land. Cleopatra's Egypt was a kingdom suspended between worlds, a jewel coveted by Rome, and a land that still remembered its ancient greatness. To inherit such a throne was both a gift and a burden. In the chapters ahead, her journey will unfold against this backdrop, revealing how one woman stood at the crossroads of history and sought to bend the currents of power to her will. The rise of Cleopatra. When Cleopatra ascended to the throne of Egypt, the world she stepped into was already turbulent, marked by political uncertainty, foreign pressures, and the fragile authority of her dynasty. Her rise to power was not the smooth inheritance of a stable kingdom, but rather the outcome of struggle, diplomacy, and the remarkable ability to assert herself in a time when women were rarely permitted a commanding role in state affairs. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE, the daughter of Ptolemy XII Auletes, a king whose reign was characterized by his dependence on Rome and the resentment of his people. His lavish expenditures and the heavy taxation imposed to pay for Roman support provoked deep unrest in Egypt. The monarchy, once viewed as divinely sanctioned, had become entangled with foreign influence, eroding the legitimacy of Ptolemy XII in the eyes of many Egyptians. Cleopatra grew up in this climate of tension, where her father's throne was far from secure and survival often depended on the goodwill of Roman leaders. Ptolemy XII was briefly forced into exile after popular uprisings, but he regained his throne through Roman intervention. Cleopatra, observing these events as a child, would have quickly learned the lesson that Egypt's monarchy existed under the shadow of Roman approval. Her father's ability to return to power through Rome's assistance demonstrated that alliances and patronage were as vital as the traditional symbols of Egyptian kingship. This lesson would later define much of Cleopatra's political strategy. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra ascended to the throne at the age of 18. According to dynastic custom, she ruled jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10 years old at the time. As had been the case for many generations of the Ptolemies, the siblings were also married and named to strengthen their claim, though Cleopatra was clearly the dominant partner. In these early years, her authority was contested, not only by her brother's advisors, but also by the broader political forces that sought to control the kingdom's wealth. Cleopatra distinguished herself from the outset. She adopted Egyptian traditions more fully than any of her recent ancestors, presenting herself as pharaoh in both ritual and imagery. She identified closely with the goddess Isis, appearing in temple inscriptions as the living embodiment of divine power. By embracing this role, Cleopatra appealed to her Egyptian subjects, strengthening a bond that her predecessors, often too focused on Greek customs, had neglected. Her willingness to speak Egyptian further deepened her connection with the people, making her rule more than a continuation of Ptolemaic monarchy but a revival of Pharaohic tradition. Yet her position was far from secure. Advisors around Ptolemy XIII sought to sideline her, pushing for the young boy's dominance in the dual kingship. Within a few years, Cleopatra was forced into exile, driven from Alexandria by a hostile court faction. It was during this period of displacement that her fate became tied irrevocably to Rome, for the struggle for her throne coincided with the great civil conflicts that divided the Roman Republic. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt while pursuing his rival Pompey. Egypt became the stage upon which Roman rivalries and dynastic disputes converged. Pompey had fled to Egypt seeking refuge, but Ptolemy XIII's advisors ordered his assassination in an attempt to win Caesar's favor. Instead of pleasing the Roman general, this act horrified him, and Caesar soon involved himself in the conflict between Cleopatra and her brother. Cleopatra, seizing the opportunity, forged her famous alliance with Caesar. Accounts of her entry into Caesar's presence, smuggled into the palace to meet him in secret, have endured as legendary, though the precise details may have been colored by Roman imagination. Regardless of how it occurred, the result was undeniable. Cleopatra secured Caesar's support, and with it, her restoration to the throne. The Alexandrian War that followed was brutal. Caesar's forces clashed with those of Ptolemy XIII in the streets of Alexandria, with the city itself becoming a battlefield. Cleopatra, though young, played an active role in these struggles, aligning her fortunes with Caesar's military might. Ultimately, Ptolemy XIII perished in the fighting, and Cleopatra was restored as ruler of Egypt, now alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIV. With Caesar's presence in Egypt, Cleopatra consolidated her position, ensuring that her authority was no longer in question. This alliance with Caesar was not merely political, but also personal. Cleopatra bore him a son, Ptolemy XV Philopator Caesar, better known as Caesarion. The child's birth symbolized Cleopatra's attempt to secure a future for her dynasty, linking it directly with Rome's most powerful figure. While Caesar never formally recognized Caesarion as his heir in Rome, Cleopatra presented her son as both a Ptolemaic king and the continuation of Caesar's legacy. This bold claim would later have profound consequences. The rise of Cleopatra was not simply the tale of a queen restored by Roman intervention. It was also the story of her ability to navigate the perilous world of politics, balancing her role as pharaoh of Egypt with her role as ally to the Roman general who dominated Mediterranean affairs. She proved herself adaptable, resourceful, and determined to preserve Egypt's independence, even in the face of overwhelming foreign power. In these early years of her reign, Cleopatra transformed from a displaced queen into a sovereign of formidable presence. She mastered the art of diplomacy, projected the image of a divine monarch, and secured her throne through both intelligence and calculated alliances. Yet the partnership with Caesar also bound her destiny ever closer to that of Rome, ensuring that the fate of Egypt would be tied to the shifting struggles of the Republic. Her rise marked the beginning of a reign that would be remembered for its brilliance and its tragedy. It was the emergence of a queen who, against all odds, claimed her place in history not merely as a consort of powerful men, but as a ruler who understood power in all its forms and used it to carve her own path through the turbulence of antiquity. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. The meeting of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar marked a turning point not only in her personal destiny but also in the fate of Egypt. When Caesar entered Alexandria in 48 BCE, he was not merely a Roman general seeking temporary refuge in the midst of his civil war against Pompey. He was the most powerful man of his age, a commander whose victories had reshaped the Republic, and a statesman whose ambitions extended far beyond the limits of traditional Roman politics. Cleopatra, displaced from her throne and forced into exile by her brother's advisors, recognized in Caesar both a threat and an opportunity. Her ability to align herself with him demonstrated not only her political acumen, but also her capacity to transform personal encounters into instruments of survival and authority. Accounts of Cleopatra's first meeting with Caesar vary, for much of what we know was written by Roman historians who viewed her with suspicion, fascination, or disdain. Yet even through these hostile or embellished sources, her presence emerges vividly. Tradition holds that she was smuggled into Caesar's quarters rolled in a carpet or bedding, an act that has become one of the most famous anecdotes of antiquity. Whether this detail is fact or invention, the underlying truth remains clear. Cleopatra sought direct contact with Caesar at a moment of peril, and she succeeded in gaining his attention. The result was an alliance that would restore her to power and alter the course of Egyptian history. For Caesar, Cleopatra's claim to the throne aligned with his own political interests. Pompey had been killed upon arriving in Egypt, murdered on the orders of Ptolemy XIII's court in a misguided attempt to gain Roman favor. Caesar, deeply offended by this betrayal, saw in Cleopatra an alternative monarch whose cause he could support. By backing her claim, Caesar could both punish those who had killed Pompey and establish a ruler who owed her position to him. For Cleopatra, Caesar's support offered the military force and legitimacy she needed to reassert her authority over Egypt. The conflict that followed, known as the Alexandrian War, was fierce and destructive. Caesar's forces, though limited in number, held strategic advantages in discipline and organization, while Cleopatra's allies provided local support. The city of Alexandria became a battlefield, with its streets and harbors echoing with the sounds of siege and combat. In the course of the fighting, Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while attempting to flee, leaving Cleopatra once more in possession of her throne. She was restored as queen, this time ruling alongside her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, though in practice she held supreme authority. Cleopatra's relationship with Caesar quickly deepened beyond the battlefield. Their union produced a son, Caesarion, whose full name proclaimed him both the child of Caesar and the continuation of Egypt's royal line. In presenting Caesarion to the world, Cleopatra sought to secure her dynasty's survival by intertwining it with the legacy of Rome's most powerful figure. The boy was not only a symbol of personal alliance, but also a calculated political instrument meant to anchor Egypt's sovereignty in the uncertain tides of Roman politics. During Caesar's months in Egypt, Cleopatra accompanied him not only in governance, but also in journeys along the Nile. Ancient sources speak of their voyage aboard a grand barge, a display of both luxury and royal tradition. These accounts, though colored by exaggeration, reflect Cleopatra's strategy of presenting Egypt to Caesar in all its magnificence, emphasizing both the wealth of the land and the grandeur of its monarchy. In aligning herself with Caesar, she also sought to remind him that Egypt was not merely a province to be absorbed, but a kingdom with its own splendor and traditions. For Caesar, the relationship offered advantages and complications. Cleopatra was an ally in a region crucial to Roman grain supply, and her loyalty strengthened his position as he prepared to return to Rome and continue his political dominance. Yet their union also raised suspicions among Romans, who viewed foreign queens with distrust and often portrayed them as threats to Roman virtue. This tension would grow in later years, but for Cleopatra, the immediate benefit outweighed the distant risk. When Caesar departed from Egypt in 47 BCE, leaving Cleopatra on the throne, he ensured her security by stationing Roman troops in the kingdom. This military presence reinforced her authority and discouraged potential challengers. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra was no longer merely a queen restored by chance, but a ruler with the backing of Rome's most powerful man. Her reign entered a new phase, marked by increased stability and renewed confidence. Cleopatra visited Rome in 46 BCE, arriving with her young son and establishing herself in Caesar's orbit. Her presence in the city caused fascination and controversy. Romans were captivated by her intelligence, her bearing, and her wealth. Yet many also resented the influence she seemed to wield over Caesar. Political rivals used her presence as a weapon, accusing Caesar of aspiring to kingship under the influence of a foreign queen. Cleopatra resided in Caesar's villa across the Tiber, a visible reminder of their connection, and her son stood as a living challenge to Rome's traditions, for the Republic had no room for dynastic monarchy. The relationship with Caesar brought Cleopatra prestige, but it also entangled her fate even more deeply with Rome's. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, the stability she had secured through their alliance collapsed in an instant. Cleopatra, recognizing the danger, returned to Egypt with Caesarion. She had gained much through her bond with Caesar, but his death left her vulnerable once more to the shifting currents of Roman power. The partnership between Cleopatra and Caesar was a union of strategy as much as affection. She found in him the military strength and legitimacy to secure her throne, while he found in her a loyal ally in a critical region of the Mediterranean. Their relationship embodied the intersection of personal ambition and geopolitical necessity. For Cleopatra, it was the foundation upon which she rebuilt her reign, a reign that would later be tested again when another Roman leader entered her life and drew her into the final struggle of her dynasty. Her time with Caesar revealed the essence of Cleopatra's rule, a capacity to adapt, to align herself with power, and to use intellect and presence to transform her circumstances. She was not content to be a passive figure in history, but an active agent who shaped events through deliberate choices. The bond with Caesar secured her throne, but it also set the stage for the challenges and tragedies that lay ahead. For Rome was not finished with Egypt, and Cleopatra's story was only beginning its most dramatic phase. Between Rome and Egypt, the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE transformed the political world of Rome, and with it, the fragile security Cleopatra had built. For nearly 4 years, she had ruled Egypt with Caesar's support, her throne defended by his legions and her position strengthened by their alliance. His death in the Senate House left her exposed, a queen whose legitimacy was tied to a Roman patron now struck down by his own people. For Cleopatra, the challenge was immediate and immense. She had to preserve her sovereignty, protect her son Caesarion, and navigate the dangerous currents of Roman politics without the protection of the man who had restored her reign. The atmosphere in Rome following Caesar's assassination was chaotic. His killers, led by Brutus and Cassius, claimed they had struck to save the Republic from monarchy, but instead they plunged the city into further civil strife. Caesar's supporters rallied under Marcus Antonius, better known as Mark Antony, and later under Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. The balance of power shifted daily, alliances formed and dissolved, and the Republic descended once more into civil war. In this maelstrom, Cleopatra's position was precarious. She was the mother of Caesar's child, a fact that could be both a source of legitimacy and a cause of danger. Upon hearing of Caesar's death, Cleopatra quickly departed Rome with Caesarion, returning to Egypt to secure her kingdom. Her departure was not an act of retreat alone, but a necessary calculation. In Rome, Caesarion's existence was a threat to Octavian, who claimed Caesar's legacy through adoption. In Egypt, however, Caesarion could be presented as the rightful heir, a link between the divine line of the Ptolemies and the might of Rome. Cleopatra proclaimed her son as pharaoh alongside herself, giving him titles that emphasized his role as both Egyptian ruler and the son of Caesar. By elevating Caesarion, she reinforced her dynasty's claim while preparing for the uncertain years ahead. Her return to Egypt also marked the beginning of her independent rule, unanchored by Caesar's direct influence. Cleopatra had learned from her years alongside him that survival depended on more than wealth or armies. It required adaptability, foresight, and the ability to bind one's fate to the shifting realities of Rome. She strengthened Egypt internally, securing its borders, consolidating its resources, and maintaining the prosperity that made it indispensable to Rome's grain supply. Egypt's wealth was her greatest weapon, for it ensured that no Roman leader could ignore her kingdom without risking famine among their own people. Yet Cleopatra's independence was fragile. Rome's leaders turned their attention to the eastern Mediterranean, where resources and allegiances were vital in their struggle for supremacy. Mark Antony, emerging as one of the most powerful figures after Caesar's death, took command of the eastern provinces. His path and Cleopatra's soon converged. Before their famous alliance, however, Cleopatra had to survive suspicion. In the immediate aftermath of Caesar's assassination, she was accused by some Romans of having played a role in the conspiracy, though no evidence supported the claim. Such rumors reflected Rome's deep mistrust of foreign queens, and they revealed how easily her position could be undermined by propaganda. Cleopatra countered these dangers by cultivating her image with great care. In Egypt, she presented herself as the embodiment of Isis, the divine mother and protector. Her depictions in temples emphasized continuity with ancient pharaohs, linking her reign to traditions stretching back thousands of years. At the same time, she maintained her Greek heritage, ruling from Alexandria with a court steeped in Hellenistic culture and learning. This dual identity allowed her to command loyalty across a divided population, bridging the gap between Egyptian subjects and Greek elites. Economically, Cleopatra worked to stabilize Egypt. The Nile's fertility remained the heart of her kingdom, but she also promoted trade and sought to control strategic routes that connected the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and beyond. By securing wealth and projecting prosperity, she made herself indispensable to Rome's ambitions in the region. Rome needed Egypt's grain, and that necessity gave Cleopatra leverage in her dealings with Roman generals. Her diplomacy was equally calculated. Cleopatra sent envoys to Rome's new leaders, carefully balancing her support to avoid committing prematurely to any single faction. She recognized that aligning with the wrong Roman figure could cost her everything. In this dangerous moment, her survival depended on patience, observation, and timing. It was a game of waiting for the right opportunity, a skill she had mastered during her earlier struggles for the throne. The opportunity arrived when Mark Antony summoned her to meet him in Tarsus in 41 BCE. Antony, preparing his campaigns in the east and seeking to secure allies, required Egypt's wealth and support. Cleopatra understood the summons not as a command but as an invitation to shape her destiny once more. Her response would lay the foundation for one of history's most legendary alliances, but it also reflected the strategies she had honed in the years following Caesar's death. Before that fateful meeting, however, Cleopatra's reign after Caesar reveals much about her nature as a ruler. She was not paralyzed by his loss, nor was she defined solely by her relationship with him. Instead, she adapted to new realities, asserted her independence, and prepared her kingdom for survival in a world dominated by Rome's rivalries. She strengthened her legitimacy through Caesarion, revitalized Egypt's internal stability, and preserved her throne in a period when many lesser rulers fell to the ambitions of Rome. Cleopatra's reign in these years also deepened the sense of mystery that surrounds her. Roman writers often sought to reduce her to the role of seductress, but such portrayals failed to capture the essence of her rule. She was, above all, a strategist who understood that Egypt could not confront Rome with arms alone. Her weapons were diplomacy, wealth, and the ability to project herself as a queen whose authority was both divine and indispensable. Between Rome and Egypt, Cleopatra walked a path fraught with peril. She was neither fully secure at home nor free from the shadow of Roman politics. Yet she endured, demonstrating a resilience and intelligence that set her apart from her contemporaries. These qualities would soon be tested further, for the meeting with Antony would open a new chapter in her life, one that combined passion with politics and placed Egypt once again at the heart of Rome's greatest struggles. The Queen of Egypt, politics, culture, and the Nile. To understand Cleopatra not merely as a figure woven into the politics of Rome, but as a sovereign in her own right, it is necessary to look within Egypt, where her authority was shaped, displayed, and tested. The Nile was not only a river, but the axis of Egyptian life, sustaining agriculture, trade, and spirituality. And in this environment, Cleopatra ruled not as a foreign client of Rome, but as a monarch deeply aware of her cultural inheritance. Though her lineage was Macedonian, she became a queen who learned the Egyptian tongue, who performed the religious duties of Pharaoh, and who presented herself as the living embodiment of Isis. These choices were not trivial, for in a kingdom of layered identities, Cleopatra needed to be more than a ruler. She had to be Egypt itself. The politics of Egypt during Cleopatra's reign were entangled with the structures inherited from centuries of Ptolemaic administration. The bureaucracy that managed irrigation, taxation, and temple wealth was immense, and it required a sovereign who could navigate both Greek traditions of governance and Egyptian expectations of divine kingship. Cleopatra's ability to speak several languages allowed her to reach beyond the elite court and into the temples and markets of her people. By breaking with the insular customs of her dynasty, she forged a bond that gave her legitimacy in a land where the Ptolemies had often been viewed as outsiders. This political acumen was one reason her authority could withstand crises that would have broken a weaker monarch. The Nile shaped every aspect of policy. The annual flood dictated the fertility of the land and thus the wealth of the kingdom. Cleopatra's reign coincided with years of instability in the flooding cycles, which meant famine was a constant threat. To maintain stability, she invested in managing granaries, securing shipments, and ensuring that the urban centers, particularly Alexandria, were supplied. The survival of her people and her own reputation depended upon it. Yet famine was not only a practical concern. In Egypt, prosperity was bound to cosmic order, and the pharaoh was seen as the guardian of Ma'at, the principle of balance and truth. Cleopatra's interventions in food supply were therefore not only acts of governance, but assertions of her sacred role. Beyond economics, Cleopatra understood the cultural theater of power. Alexandria was the jewel of her kingdom, a city founded by Alexander and nurtured by the Ptolemies into a beacon of Hellenistic civilization. Its library, its lighthouse, and its palaces projected wealth and knowledge across the Mediterranean. For Cleopatra, this city was not merely a capital, but a stage upon which her reign could be displayed. She invested in public works, in religious rituals, and in courtly grandeur, cultivating an image of Egypt as both ancient and cosmopolitan. She walked a delicate line, honoring native traditions while embracing the intellectual brilliance of the Hellenistic world. This duality defined her reign and made her a figure who belonged simultaneously to Egypt and to the broader Mediterranean. Religion was central to her rule. Pharaohs were seen as divine, and Cleopatra adopted this tradition with intensity. She was not content with distant association, but deliberately linked herself to Isis, goddess of motherhood, magic, and kingship. By embodying Isis, she became the mediator between gods and men, an image that resonated deeply with her people. The cult of Isis expanded under her reign, spreading even into Rome and other Mediterranean lands. This fusion of religion and politics allowed her to project authority that transcended mere dynastic claim, for she was not only the daughter of Ptolemy, but the incarnation of a goddess. It was a strategy of power as old as Egypt itself, yet one that Cleopatra wielded with remarkable sophistication. Her court was a place of intellect and diplomacy. Philosophers, physicians, and engineers thrived under her patronage. She understood that knowledge was power, and in aligning herself with the traditions of learning in Alexandria, she tied her rule to a vision of Egypt as the intellectual heart of the world. Diplomats came to her not only because she was a political actor, but because she was perceived as a sovereign with command of wisdom, science, and culture. In this, she was unlike many rulers of her age, blending political maneuver with cultural patronage in ways that expanded her influence beyond borders. Cleopatra's domestic politics were never entirely free from the shadow of Rome. Her alliances with Caesar and Antony gave her leverage, but also drew Egypt further into the struggles of foreign powers. Still, within her kingdom, she sought to maintain sovereignty. She minted coins bearing her image, a powerful declaration in a world where coinage was propaganda. On these coins, she appeared not merely as a consort of Roman generals, but as a monarch in her own right, often shown with strong, even masculine features, emphasizing authority over beauty. The message was clear. She was not a queen dependent upon foreign power, but Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. This blending of politics, culture, religion, and strategy was the foundation of Cleopatra's reign. She was not merely the lover of Caesar or Antony, nor simply the last of the Ptolemies. She was a monarch who used every tool available to preserve Egypt's independence in an age when empires collapsed under the weight of Rome's rise. Her mastery of Egyptian tradition, her careful management of resources, and her deliberate self-presentation as both Greek and Egyptian, mortal and divine, created a sovereignty that was at once ancient and new. To see Cleopatra only through the lens of her Roman relationships is to miss the essence of her power. She was a queen forged by Egypt itself, ruling in a land where history stretched back millennia, where the river dictated life, and where the people looked to their pharaoh as the embodiment of cosmic order. In this role, Cleopatra proved herself capable not only of survival but of leaving an indelible mark upon the history of both Egypt and the wider world. Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Love and Empire. The course of Cleopatra's life turned once more upon the shifting tides of Roman politics. With the death of Julius Caesar, Rome entered a new phase of conflict, and Cleopatra's survival depended upon how she navigated the ambitions of men who now held the fate of empires in their hands. Among these figures, none was more consequential than Mark Antony, a general of immense ability, a man of charisma, and a commander whose ambitions reached as far as the East. Their meeting would produce one of history's most renowned partnerships, one that intertwined politics with intimacy and that altered the destiny of Egypt. Antony sought Cleopatra not merely for her beauty, but for her power. After the assassination of Caesar, Rome was divided among the triumvirs Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. Antony, assigned to the eastern provinces, needed resources to secure his campaigns, and Egypt, rich in grain, wealth, and ships, became indispensable. Cleopatra, in turn, recognized that Antony could provide her with the military support she required to stabilize her throne and preserve Egypt's independence. Their bond was born not simply of personal attraction, but of mutual necessity, shaped by the reality that power in the Mediterranean now demanded alliances that transcended borders. Their meeting at Tarsus has been retold for centuries, often colored by embellishment. Cleopatra arrived not as a supplicant, but as a sovereign who understood the importance of image. She presented herself in a barge, adorned with purple sails, reclining beneath a canopy of gold, attended by servants dressed as figures from mythology. This display was more than pageantry. It was a declaration of power, designed to captivate Antony and to remind all who witnessed it that she was no mere client queen, but pharaoh. The spectacle succeeded, for Antony was drawn into her orbit, and their partnership began. Cleopatra's relationship with Antony offered Egypt renewed strength. With his presence, she secured recognition of her authority, as well as the restoration of certain territories once lost to Egypt. Antony, in return, benefited from her wealth, which funded his military campaigns. Together, they embodied a fusion of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman worlds, a union that symbolized both the grandeur and the tension of the age. Yet, it was also a partnership fraught with risk, for Octavian and Rome watched carefully, ready to portray their alliance as a threat to Roman order. The intimacy between Cleopatra and Antony deepened with time. They had children together, further cementing their bond. Cleopatra bore him twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and later a third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus. In these children, she sought to create a dynasty that might unify Egypt and Rome, an ambition that reflected both personal hope and political calculation. The children represented continuity, the promise of a new order that blended East and West. For Cleopatra, they were also an anchor, a guarantee that Egypt's lineage would not vanish in the storms of Roman politics. Their court in Alexandria became a place of luxury and ceremony, yet beneath the displays lay serious strategy. Cleopatra and Antony distributed kingdoms and titles to their children, an act that declared their vision of an Eastern empire. Antony granted Cleopatra territories once belonging to the Ptolemies, extending her authority beyond Egypt's borders. Such gestures were not merely personal gifts, but political statements, for they suggested a future where Antony and Cleopatra would stand as rulers of a vast dominion, challenging the supremacy of Rome. Religion and symbolism continued to play an essential role in Cleopatra's politics. As with Caesar, she presented herself alongside Antony as divine. She was Isis, and he was associated with Dionysus, god of wine, fertility, and power. This pairing elevated their union beyond politics, casting it in a cosmic light that resonated both with Egyptians, who saw their pharaoh as divine, and with Greeks, who were steeped in the traditions of myth. By embodying these roles, they created an image of sovereignty that extended into the realm of the sacred, strengthening their claim to legitimacy. Yet the union also fueled resentment in Rome. Octavian, keen to consolidate his own authority, exploited the relationship to depict Antony as corrupted by the allure of a foreign queen. Cleopatra was cast as the manipulator, the enchantress who threatened to subvert Roman values. This portrayal, sharpened by propaganda, prepared the ground for conflict. It was not merely Antony who was at stake, but the question of whether Rome itself could remain unchallenged in the face of such an alliance. For Cleopatra, the stakes were immense. Her reign, her dynasty, and her children's future depended upon the strength of her bond with Antony and the outcome of his struggle with Octavian. She had chosen her path, binding Egypt's destiny to a man whose ambitions matched her own. Together they envisioned a new world, one in which Egypt and Rome were not adversaries but partners in empire. Yet their vision was fragile, threatened by the relentless currents of Roman politics, where alliances were fleeting and power was always contested. In Cleopatra and Antony, history witnessed not merely a romance, but a convergence of power, culture, and ambition. Their partnership embodied the possibilities and the dangers of an age when empires clashed and identities blurred. It was a union of necessity, of passion, and of strategy, one that would lead them both to triumphs and, ultimately, to tragedy. For in binding themselves to one another, they bound Egypt and Rome in a conflict that would decide the fate of the ancient world. Rome and Alexandria, two worlds in conflict. The alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony carried within it the seeds of confrontation, for it was not a partnership that could exist unnoticed or unchallenged. Rome was a republic in transition, moving toward autocracy under Octavian, who carefully shaped his image as the defender of Roman tradition against what he portrayed as the decadence of the East. Cleopatra and Antony, ruling together from Alexandria, came to embody everything Octavian claimed to resist. Thus, the struggle between these figures was more than a contest for power. It was a clash of worlds, ideologies, and visions for the future of the Mediterranean. Alexandria, at the center of this struggle, was a city unlike any other. Founded by Alexander the Great, it had grown into a metropolis of knowledge, commerce, and cultural exchange. Its harbor connected Egypt to the wider Mediterranean, and its lighthouse, one of the great wonders of the world, symbolized the reach of Egyptian influence. In Alexandria, Greek and Egyptian traditions merged, and under Cleopatra's patronage, the city flourished as a center of intellectual brilliance and political theater. To Romans, however, Alexandria was a place of suspicion, a symbol of foreign luxury, a city that threatened to overshadow Rome's own greatness. Octavian skillfully manipulated these perceptions. Through calculated propaganda, he depicted Antony as having abandoned Roman discipline, corrupted by the opulence of Alexandria and enslaved by Cleopatra's charms. Cleopatra, in this narrative, was not a sovereign defending her throne, but a seductress, a dangerous queen whose ambitions endangered Rome itself. By framing the conflict in these terms, Octavian transformed a civil war into a war of survival, casting himself as the guardian of Roman values against the decadence of the East. In reality, the situation was far more complex. Antony remained a Roman general, commanding legions and shaping strategy with skill, but his partnership with Cleopatra was undeniable. Together, they presented an alternative vision of power, one that was not rooted solely in Rome, but in a fusion of East and West. Their children were assigned territories, their court projected divine authority, and their ambitions reached across the Mediterranean. This vision threatened Octavian not because it was weak, but because it was strong, because it offered a possibility that Rome might not be the sole master of the ancient world. The tension between Rome and Alexandria was therefore not only military but cultural. In Rome, austerity and discipline were celebrated as ideals, while in Alexandria, luxury and cosmopolitanism were integral to its identity. These contrasts became weapons in the struggle, sharpened by speeches, coins, and rumors. Octavian positioned himself as the defender of Rome's traditions, while portraying Antony as a man who had betrayed them. Cleopatra, in this rhetoric, became the embodiment of otherness, a queen whose very presence challenged the idea of Roman supremacy. Despite these narratives, Cleopatra continued to rule as pharaoh. She maintained control over Egypt's resources, ensured the flow of grain to sustain both her own people and Rome, and upheld the traditions of Egyptian kingship. She was not a passive figure but an active participant, shaping events as much as Antony did. For her, the conflict was not only about Antony's rivalry with Octavian, but about the survival of Egypt as an independent kingdom in a world increasingly dominated by Rome. Diplomatic gestures were made, but the rift could not be healed. Octavian's growing power in Rome, fueled by his careful manipulation of public opinion and his control of legions, meant that confrontation was inevitable. The more Cleopatra and Antony projected their sovereignty from Alexandria, the more Octavian sought to undermine it. Their worlds were moving on a collision course, one shaped not only by armies, but by symbols, narratives, and the perception of legitimacy. The preparations for war reflected this reality. Antony and Cleopatra assembled fleets and armies, drawing upon the resources of Egypt and its allies. Octavian, in turn, mobilized Rome's power, presenting the conflict not as a civil war, but as a campaign against a foreign threat. This framing was crucial, for it allowed him to rally the Roman Senate and people to his cause. Cleopatra was cast as the enemy queen, and Antony as her corrupted partner, a narrative that would soon explode upon the waters of Actium. The conflict between Rome and Alexandria was therefore a struggle of dual identities. It was the Roman Republic, in its final transformation into empire, confronting the last pharaoh of Egypt. It was austerity against luxury, tradition against cosmopolitanism, propaganda against spectacle. Yet beneath these contrasts lay a deeper truth. Both sides sought dominion, both sought to shape the Mediterranean world in their image, and both were willing to use every resource, military, cultural, and symbolic, to achieve it. In this great clash, Cleopatra stood at the heart, not as a shadow behind Antony, but as a monarch in her own right. The fate of Egypt, the legacy of the Ptolemies, and the balance of the ancient world rested upon her decisions and upon the fragile alliance she shared with Antony. Their world was moving toward a decisive moment, when the Nile and the Tiber, Alexandria and Rome, would meet in battle for the future of the Mediterranean. The Battle of Actium, the fall of a dream. The conflict between Octavian and the alliance of Cleopatra and Mark Antony reached its climax in the year 31 BCE, upon the waters near Actium, a promontory on the western coast of Greece. Here, fleets and armies assembled, and the future of the Mediterranean was to be decided. For Antony and Cleopatra, this was not merely a military encounter, but the culmination of years of ambition, alliance, and struggle against Rome's expanding shadow. The battle would determine not only who held power in Rome, but also whether Egypt could continue to exist as an independent kingdom. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a vast fleet, numbering hundreds of ships, many of them large and heavily armed. Cleopatra herself contributed a formidable naval force, supplied with wealth drawn from Egypt's resources. Their fleet, however, was slow and cumbersome, designed for power rather than speed. Octavian, guided by his admiral Agrippa, commanded a smaller but more agile navy. Agrippa's tactics emphasized maneuverability and discipline, qualities that would prove decisive when the battle began. The strategy leading to Actium was shaped by geography and necessity. Antony and Cleopatra had established their base at Actium, hoping to secure supply lines and to challenge Octavian directly. Yet disease, desertion, and shortages began to weaken their position. Octavian's forces, controlling the seas and harassing supply routes, placed constant pressure on their opponents. Antony's soldiers remained loyal, but the strain of the campaign began to erode morale, and defections from his side gave Octavian valuable intelligence. When the fleets finally engaged, the battle revealed the disparity in preparation and strategy. Octavian's ships, smaller and lighter, were able to outmaneuver Antony's heavy vessels. The engagement turned chaotic, as ships clashed and crews fought with spears, arrows, and boarding tactics. Cleopatra, positioned with her own squadron, observed the unfolding conflict. Accounts differ on her actions, yet tradition records that, at a crucial moment, her fleet broke from the battle and sailed southward, retreating toward Egypt. Antony, seeing her departure, chose to follow, abandoning his position and leaving much of his fleet to collapse in disarray. The flight of Antony and Cleopatra has long been interpreted as betrayal or panic, yet the decision may have been a calculated attempt to preserve their remaining forces for another struggle. Whatever the reasoning, the result was disastrous. Without their commanders, Antony's remaining forces were overwhelmed. Many of his ships were destroyed, others surrendered, and the cohesion of his army fractured. The battle ended not only in defeat but in humiliation, for Octavian could claim that his enemies had fled the field, leaving their soldiers to perish. Actium was more than a military disaster. It was the collapse of a vision. Antony and Cleopatra had imagined a Mediterranean world shaped by their union, a realm in which Egypt retained sovereignty and power alongside Rome. The defeat shattered this dream, leaving them with only retreat and uncertainty. For Cleopatra, the loss was not only political but existential. Her children's future, her dynasty's survival, and Egypt's independence were now imperiled by Octavian's triumph. Octavian, in turn, seized upon the victory as a moment of destiny. His propaganda emphasized not merely the defeat of Antony, but the subjugation of Cleopatra, the foreign queen whose ambitions had threatened Rome. The narrative framed him as the defender of the Republic, though in truth, the victory at Actium marked the final stage in Rome's transformation into empire. Octavian would soon become Augustus, the first emperor, and the Mediterranean would fall under Roman dominion. For Antony and Cleopatra, Actium was the beginning of the end. They retreated to Egypt, gathering what remained of their forces and preparing for the inevitable confrontation that would come. Yet the momentum had shifted irreversibly. Octavian's forces, emboldened by victory and supported by the prestige of triumph, prepared to march against them. The defeat at Actium was not merely a setback, but a turning point, the moment when hope gave way to desperation. The legacy of Actium lies not only in its military outcome, but in its symbolism. It was the decisive confrontation between two worlds, Rome and Egypt, austerity and luxury, propaganda and spectacle. In the clash of ships upon the Ionian Sea, centuries of Egyptian sovereignty met the rising tide of Roman power, and the result was the collapse of Egypt's final attempt to stand as an equal to Rome. In the ruins of defeat, Cleopatra faced her greatest test. She was still pharaoh, still sovereign of Egypt, and her decisions in the aftermath of Actium would determine whether her kingdom could endure or whether it would be consumed entirely by the empire that now approached with relentless force. The last pharaoh, Cleopatra's final days. After the calamity at Actium, Cleopatra and Antony returned to Egypt, their fortunes diminished, their alliance shaken, yet their resolve not wholly broken. Alexandria once more became the stage upon which the fate of Egypt would unfold. The city still retained its wealth, its strategic importance, and its symbolic grandeur. But the power of Rome, embodied in Octavian's advancing forces, loomed ever closer, and the queen who had once commanded alliances across the Mediterranean now faced the question of how to preserve her throne, her dynasty, and perhaps even her life. Cleopatra did not yield immediately to despair. She set about strengthening Alexandria's defenses, reinforcing its walls, and amassing what remained of her navy and army. Reports suggest that she explored every possible strategy, negotiation, deception, and even the prospect of flight to distant territories where she might rebuild power. She fortified her palace and ensured that her treasuries remained secure, for in a world ruled by wealth and war, gold could still purchase loyalty and opportunity. Yet the shadow of Rome lengthened, and with each passing month, Octavian's strength grew while hers waned. Antony, for his part, was a man torn between pride and despair. Once one of Rome's greatest generals, he now found himself diminished, haunted by the memory of defeat and by the whispers of betrayal that followed him from Actium. His loyalty to Cleopatra remained, yet his own men began to defect, sensing that the struggle was lost. Cleopatra, pragmatic as ever, sought to negotiate with Octavian directly, even as Antony's pride prevented him from doing so. In her eyes, the survival of Egypt was paramount, and if diplomacy could secure it, she was prepared to act. Octavian advanced with calculated patience. He knew that Antony and Cleopatra were weakened, and he sought not only to conquer, but to humiliate. His propaganda continued to cast Cleopatra as the dangerous queen, the foreign temptress who had corrupted Antony. By emphasizing her role, Octavian ensured that his final victory would not only be military but symbolic, a triumph over Egypt itself. The stage was being set for a dramatic conclusion, one that would confirm his ascendancy and erase the last vestiges of Ptolemaic power. When Octavian finally approached Alexandria in 30 BCE, the city braced for siege. Antony attempted to rally his forces for a final defense, but morale was low and desertions increased. The decisive blow came when Antony's fleet, instead of resisting Octavian, surrendered without battle. His cavalry soon followed, leaving him with little more than a fragment of his former power. Antony's world, built upon loyalty and valor, had collapsed, and with it, his spirit faltered. Accounts of his final moments speak of tragedy steeped in honor. Believing Cleopatra had already taken her life, Antony attempted to follow her into death by falling upon his own sword. Gravely wounded, he was brought to her, still alive, and there, in the seclusion of her chamber, the two met for the last time. It was a farewell steeped in despair and loyalty, a moment that symbolized the collapse not only of their partnership, but of the dream they had shared. Antony died in her arms, and Cleopatra was left alone, the last pharaoh facing the conqueror of Rome. Cleopatra's final days were marked by both defiance and inevitability. Octavian demanded her surrender, and she met him with the dignity of a queen. She sought to negotiate for the future of her children, attempting to secure their safety even as her own fate became clear. Octavian, pragmatic and ruthless, understood the value of parading Cleopatra in a Roman triumph, yet he also recognized the danger of allowing her to live as a symbol of resistance. The queen who had once ruled as Isis incarnate could not be reduced to a prisoner without risk. Thus, Cleopatra chose her own end. Refusing to be displayed as a trophy in Rome, she arranged her death with deliberation. Tradition records that she used the bite of an asp hidden within a basket of figs, though other accounts suggest poison prepared by her attendants. Whatever the method, the act was her final assertion of sovereignty. In death, she preserved her dignity, denying Octavian the satisfaction of spectacle. She died as pharaoh, not as captive. With her passing, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt, for centuries a kingdom that had stood as a beacon of ancient power and cultural brilliance, was absorbed into the Roman Empire. The Nile, once ruled by pharaohs who were gods upon earth, now flowed under the dominion of Rome. Cleopatra's children were taken into custody, with some surviving under Roman guardianship, though their destiny was forever severed from the throne of Egypt. Cleopatra's final days were not merely the end of a reign, but the end of an era. She embodied the last flicker of Egypt's independence, a queen who sought to navigate the turbulent currents of empire, who wielded politics, culture, and even love in her struggle to preserve her kingdom. Her death marked the close of the Hellenistic world, the triumph of Rome, and the silencing of a lineage that had once traced itself back to Alexander the Great. In her final act, Cleopatra ensured that her story would not be one of defeat alone, but of defiance. She left the world not as a captive queen, but as the last pharaoh, sovereign even in death, her legacy destined to endure far beyond the fall of her kingdom. The goddess of the Nile. As Cleopatra aged, the image she cultivated became ever more entwined with divinity. In the religious imagination of her people, the pharaoh was more than a ruler. They were a living deity, an intermediary between the gods and the mortal realm. Cleopatra embraced this role with calculated brilliance, elevating herself to the status of Isis, the goddess of motherhood, fertility, and protection. By aligning herself with Isis, Cleopatra not only drew upon one of Egypt's most enduring symbols of divine authority, but also fashioned a personal mythology that positioned her as the embodiment of the nation's spiritual essence. Her portraits, statues, and coinage of the time increasingly emphasized this fusion of woman and goddess. Draped in flowing robes, adorned with diadems resembling the sun disk and cow horns associated with Isis, Cleopatra transformed her royal image into one that transcended mere politics. The people of Egypt could view her not simply as their queen, but as their divine protector, chosen by the gods to ensure prosperity and stability. This symbolic association extended into the rituals of the court, where priests performed ceremonies that merged the worship of Isis with reverence for the living queen. This alignment with divinity was not without its political dimensions. In Rome, Cleopatra's claim to divine identity was viewed with suspicion and disdain, feeding into narratives that depicted her as manipulative, arrogant, and dangerously ambitious. To the Roman elite, the idea of a mortal woman proclaiming herself as a goddess was deeply unsettling, particularly when that woman exerted influence over figures like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Yet within Egypt, the divine persona served as a vital pillar of legitimacy. As dynastic challenges persisted and foreign powers encroached upon her sovereignty, Cleopatra's status as Isis incarnate offered her people a sense of continuity, reassurance, and identity in a time of uncertainty. The goddess imagery also extended beyond Egypt's borders. In her dealings with foreign rulers, Cleopatra's divine persona was both a diplomatic tool and a statement of supremacy. She understood that perception could shape power, and so she leaned into the aura of mystery that her self-deification created. To allies, it was an assurance that their partnership was blessed by the gods. To enemies, it was a warning. To challenge Cleopatra was to challenge divinity itself. In a broader sense, this fusion of politics and religion reflected the timeless truth of ancient rule. The power of a monarch depended not only on armies or wealth, but also on the narratives woven around their reign. Cleopatra's mastery lay in her ability to control and amplify these narratives. Through her identification with Isis, she wove a story of eternal Egypt, resilient and divine, with herself at its center. Yet, as with all human endeavors, the tension between myth and reality loomed. The goddess of the Nile could inspire devotion and awe, but she was still bound by the mortal struggles of statecraft, war, and diplomacy. The divine mask offered strength, but it could not shield her entirely from the storms gathering on the horizon. In the end, Cleopatra's embodiment of Isis was more than ritual. It was survival, power, and identity intertwined. To her people, she was the eternal Nile, flowing with divine grace and strength. To her enemies, she was a mystery cloaked in sacred authority, too potent to dismiss and too dangerous to ignore. Yet beneath the goddess's crown, there remained a woman of flesh and spirit, carrying the burdens of empire and the weight of destiny. The shadow of Cleopatra in history. When the news of Cleopatra's death reached Rome, the empire trembled with both relief and unease. Octavian, soon to become Augustus, proclaimed the fall of Egypt as a triumph of Rome. Yet the memory of the queen lingered like a ghost. She had not been an ordinary ruler who could be erased by conquest. Instead, she became a figure whose presence haunted both victors and subjects alike. Cleopatra's story did not vanish with her passing. It grew in complexity, retold through layers of myth, politics, and imagination. In the centuries that followed, Roman writers painted Cleopatra as both seductress and threat. For men like Plutarch and Dio Cassius, she represented an exotic danger from the east, a woman who ensnared powerful Romans through beauty and cunning. This narrative served the needs of Roman authority, casting her as the corrupting force against which Augustus's order had triumphed. By diminishing her to the role of temptress, they obscured her intelligence, her statecraft, and her vision as a monarch. Yet in doing so, they also ensured that her name would not be forgotten. Few queens in antiquity received such attention, whether hostile or admiring. Beyond Rome, Egypt preserved its own memory of Cleopatra. In temples along the Nile, inscriptions recorded her as a goddess queen, the earthly embodiment of Isis. These images stood apart from the Roman accounts, portraying her as the eternal protector of her land. For Egyptians, her reign was not solely about her ties to Caesar or Antony, but about her dedication to the traditions of the Nile. She appeared in reliefs offering to the gods, ensuring fertility and prosperity. In this way, the people of Egypt remembered her not only as the last pharaoh, but as one who sought to bridge the worlds of Greek and Egyptian belief. As time passed into the medieval world, Cleopatra's image continued to shift. In the Islamic chronicles that preserve knowledge of ancient lands, she was remembered as a learned ruler, sometimes even linked with wisdom, traditions, and alchemy. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, her story was folded into broader narratives of fallen empires and cautionary tales about love and ambition. Each retelling reshaped her, yet none erased her. Unlike so many rulers of her age, Cleopatra remained visible, both real and imagined. The Renaissance revived her in new forms. Artists, poets, and dramatists turned her into a symbol of beauty, power, and tragic destiny. In Shakespeare's hands, Cleopatra became larger than life, a woman whose passion and grandeur exceeded the boundaries of mortality. His portrayal echoed ancient Roman bias, yet elevated her as a figure of complexity and depth. The stage immortalized her as the queen who defied time, who could not be contained by the dusty pages of history. By the modern era, Cleopatra became both an object of scholarship and a cultural icon. Historians sifted through ancient texts and archaeological remains, attempting to recover the woman behind the legend. Questions of her ethnicity, her intellect, and her policies sparked debates that continue to this day. Meanwhile, artists and filmmakers cast her again and again, shaping her image for each generation. She became a lens through which ideas of power, femininity, and empire were examined. To some, she was the ultimate femme fatale. To others, a strategist ahead of her time. And to many, both at once. What endures most is the sense that Cleopatra transcended her own life. She existed not only as a ruler of Egypt in the 1st century BCE, but as a symbol reshaped for over 2,000 years. Her shadow stretches across literature, art, and historical thought, as enduring as the monuments along the Nile. The queen who once confronted Rome now lives in the imagination of countless ages, never entirely defined, never fully claimed. Cleopatra's story reflects the tension between history and myth. The truth of her reign lies hidden among fragments of papyri, inscriptions, and hostile Roman accounts. Yet the legend continues to breathe because it speaks to timeless questions about power and vulnerability, about the fate of nations, and about the ways in which memory preserves those who defy convention. She is at once the last of the pharaohs and the first of the immortals, a figure who cannot be confined to the past. Thus, the shadow of Cleopatra endures, neither fading nor fixed, but ever-changing with the eyes that behold her. In her life, she shaped kingdoms. In her death, she shaped history itself. And in the centuries that followed, her presence has remained, not as a relic, but as a living echo of ambition, mystery, and defiance. Cleopatra's eternal echo. As the long journey through Cleopatra's world draws to a close, one truth rises above the shifting sands of time. Her story was never confined to the boundaries of her reign. She was born into a kingdom already weighed by uncertainty, guided by traditions, both Greek and Egyptian, and forced to navigate a world overshadowed by Rome's expanding might. Yet within this fragile landscape, she carved out a life that would resist erasure. Cleopatra's reign embodied contradiction. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, yet she spoke many tongues and understood the diplomacy of empire. She was depicted as a temptress by her enemies, yet she commanded fleets, armies, and the loyalty of her people. She embodied Isis for her subjects, while to the Romans, she became the dangerous queen who dared to rival their ambitions. In these contrasts lies the enduring fascination of her life, an existence that cannot be reduced to a single role, but rather unfolds as a mosaic of strength, intellect, and myth. Throughout the chapters of this story, we have walked along the banks of the Nile, where temples rose to honor gods and queens alike. We have witnessed the fragile alliances with Rome, where love and politics became inseparable. We have seen her in the courts of Caesar and Antony, shaping destinies with choices that intertwine passion and survival. And we have stood before the ruins of Actium and Alexandria, where her dreams crumbled, yet her legend began. What sets Cleopatra apart from countless rulers lost to obscurity is the afterlife of her memory. Rome may have tried to diminish her, casting her as a warning against female power and Eastern influence, but this very portrayal ensured her immortality. Later generations rediscovered her as muse, symbol, and mystery. Artists crowned her in beauty, dramatists elevated her tragedy, historians sought the woman behind the myth. Across centuries, she was never allowed to vanish. Today, Cleopatra endures as both question and answer. She challenges us to reconsider the narratives of empire, gender, and cultural survival. Was she a queen undone by love, or a strategist undone by empire? Was she remembered fairly, or through the eyes of her conquerors? The uncertainty only deepens her mystery, reminding us that history is never a fixed mirror, but a shifting reflection. In the quiet hours of the night, when the past feels closer, Cleopatra's echo can still be heard. It drifts along the Nile, through the broken columns of Alexandria, through the pages of ancient historians, and the visions of poets. It is the echo of a woman who refused to be ordinary, who bound herself to gods and legends, and who shaped the course of history through courage and defiance. May the story of Cleopatra remain with you as a whisper of time, a reminder that even when empires fall, memory endures. For she was not only the last pharaoh of Egypt, but also the eternal queen of imagination. Her shadow remains, her voice lingers, and her presence, like the Nile itself, continues to flow across the ages.